Hello. Hey guys. Thank y'all so much for coming. This is our first Parent Network event in almost 2 years, and we're so glad to see y'all's faces. I'm Shelly Kinder. I'm the Parent and Family Coordinator for our children's ministry, which is our birth through 5th grade.
Yeah, and I'm Erica Swab, and I'm the Parent Coordinator for Student Ministries, so that's 6th through 12th grade. It's so good to see everybody here. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. This event is part of the Parent Network, and the Parent Network exists to equip and encourage parents to help your family walk with God.
That's right, and we just want to make sure you guys are aware there's a reason we're calling it childcare and not Grows On in Treasure Island. This evening is for you guys. You know, your kids are down there watching a movie. They're getting really cared for, but in this room is where the magic happens. You guys are why we're here. It is for you, for parents, and we're just real pumped y'all are here.
So after talking with many parents, Sass and Shelly and I, between emails and one-on-ones and just in the hallways, the consistent theme that we kept hearing was, can you help me with anxiety? Do you have books? Do you have resources? Is there any way that you can tell me what to do? My kid just is really struggling. So we thought, Stuart, we need you. But really, we just thought we need to get some help to you guys. So our hope tonight is that you will leave encouraged, that you will leave with information and maybe even some hands-on things that you can try at home with your kids, and just hopefully feel a little bit more in control of what's going on. But let's face it, there's a lot going on in the world now, with everything that our kids are seeing on the news about Afghanistan and the hurricane in Louisiana, and even the local high school shooting that took place today. Our kids are scared. They're confused. They don't know, and this just heightens their anxiety. So we're just glad that we can be together in community tonight. And then Shelly's just going to pray over us, and then we're going to hear a little bit about Stuart.
Yeah. All right, guys, if y'all pray with me. Father God, we just lift up this evening. We lift up just the words that are going to come from Stuart, Lord, that you would just help us leave this place feeling equipped and encouraged, Lord. We lift up our children. Father God, that you, when we just feel out of place and out of words for situations like all that's going on in our community, in our town, in our nation, in our world, Lord, we just lift those to you, Lord, and we just lift our children. Father God, we pray that you would live in them and live in us, Father God, and we would just walk with you, with them, Lord, and that would be enough because you are enough, Father God. We just lift all that in your name. Amen. All right, guys, all of you guys likely know who Stuart Hall is. We're just really excited. He's been a part of Port City family for years. He is currently living just north of Atlanta, Georgia, and has been involved with student ministries, parent ministries, children's ministries for over 30 years. And so we're just real pumped to have him here. We're going to get started tonight with a video, and here we go.
I just want to tell you it's the most heartwarming film, and there's a reason why I wanted to show you that little bitty clip. The young man that you saw in the movie is 34-year-old Zach Godsagan. Zach has Down syndrome. He's an actor, and he is playing opposite Shia LaBeouf, which some of you may remember from Holes and Transformers. And if you don't know much about Shia LaBeouf, you should know this. That Shia LaBeouf has had a ton of personal issues happen in his own life. The reason I wanted you to see that clip is to give you an idea of what happens in this movie, but even more so for you to know what happened behind the scenes. The whole theme or premise of the movie is Zach Godsagan is 34 years old. He's been stuck in a senior citizen's home, but more than anything in the world, this young man with Down syndrome wants to be a professional wrestler, okay? And he's watched all these VHS tapes of a wrestler named the Saltwater Redneck, okay? And so he wants to get to this camp that Saltwater Redneck throws so he can learn how to be a professional wrestler. The old man who lives in the room with him helps him escape with only his underwear on out of the senior adult place. He meets up with Shia LaBeouf and all chaos happens. But as they're going along on this journey, it just becomes incredibly heartwarming. Now, here's why I want you to know about that. And by the way, that scene that you just saw was Zach Godsagan as a Down syndrome young man improvising. His line wasn't party. He just made it up. He's brilliant. So here's what happens. Shia LaBeouf had never met Zach Gottsagen before he signed on to do this film. And the directors of the film decided this is how we're going to get them to know each other. They flew him into Atlanta, Georgia, where we live. This movie was filmed in Savannah. So they put Zach Gottsagen, young man with Down syndrome, and Shia LaBeouf, this troubled actor, in a van by themselves with only a driver. And they drove them the 3.5, 4 hours to Savannah, Georgia. And by Shia LaBeouf's own account, he was so nervous. Have you ever been around someone that's so peaceful and they don't say anything, that what you do is you compensate and so you talk too much? Shia LaBeouf just started talking. And about an hour and a half into that van ride, Shia LaBeouf said, Zach Gottsagen reached over and he held his hand. And this is what Shia LaBeouf said about this young man holding his hand. He said, I don't know if you've looked at this dude's hands, but these are the most beautiful hands, and something about holding them calmed all my fear. They start shooting the movie in Savannah. This happened in 2017, July 2017. You may remember this. Shia LaBeouf got arrested for public intoxication during the filming of this movie in downtown Savannah. He gets thrown in jail. If you don't know this, what that means to the movie industry, to that film crew, is they are losing money. All the cast is incredibly upset. All the crew is incredibly upset. Shia LaBeouf comes back on set and no one will speak to him because they're that angry. He goes all day long before a scene that they're going to film, and not one single soul, mom and dad, has spoken a word to Shia LaBeouf because they're so upset with him. If you've seen the movie, you won't watch it again the same. But if you haven't, I want you to watch for this scene right here. Because Shia LaBeouf and Zach Gottsagen are going down a river on a raft, and you're looking at a scene from the movie, but these two didn't know they were filming. And as they're sitting beside each other, this young man with Down syndrome realizes his friend is incredibly upset. And he reaches over and he puts his arm around it. And for those of you that saw the movie, you'll remember this. Shia LaBeouf literally fell into his arms, a crying mess, because someone noticed his pain. And this is just for free. After they filmed that day, Zach Gottsagen, a young man with Down syndrome, said to Shia LaBeouf, I need to talk to you. And they sat down in a room cross-legged with each other, and this young man with Down syndrome looked at him and said, this is my one chance to be a star. Don't screw it up. And Shia LaBeouf looked at him and said, I promise you, for the rest of the shooting, I will not touch another drop of alcohol. And by every indication, ladies and gentlemen, Shia LaBeouf has not drank a drop of alcohol since. Because somebody put their arm around him and said, I feel your pain. Now watch this. Guess why we're here together? You are sitting beside people, especially the high school section. You are sitting beside people who feel your pain. We're all the same here. There's not a single parent in this room that was born a parent, and I say on behalf of all of us, if I may, can we just own this? We don't know what we're doing. We don't. And there are scores of us scared to death for a ton of reasons, and we're going to talk about some of those tonight. And I just want to go ahead and tell you this as you're wearing masks, that anything that I say from a data standpoint, you can add in your mind not to mention COVID. Because not mentioning COVID and bringing that into the equation with our children, whether it's a preschooler, an elementary age, a middle schooler, or a high schooler, has changed the landscape for the next generation. But here's what all of us need to understand as we get going. Most of us in this room, and this is especially true of your kids, we can accept not being good. Because all of us know this. You're sitting there and I'm joking about us not knowing what we're doing as parents, but you know it. You can accept not being good. What we can't accept is not looking good, not appearing good. And for us as parents, I just want to ask all of us, at least for the next however long we're in this room, to let your guard down. Because there's going to be a part of you that feels like, I can't let anybody know that it's not good. Well, here's a heads up, Buttercup. It's not good for all of us. And you and I get we don't get ahead if we keep pretending like things are good. And that is true for our children as well. It's the reason why children and teenagers don't fake anxiety, they don't fake worry, and they don't fake depression. They fake being okay. And guess where they learned that from? Those of us in the room who are scared to death to let people see that we're not perfect, that we weren't born parents, that we don't know what we're doing. And so I would just love for us to do this as we start. I just want you to reach over and pat the person next to you on the back, on both sides, and just let them know we're all in the same boat, okay? And then make sure you Purell your hand after you do that. Just picking. Now, we're gonna go at blitz speed because we wanna give you guys a ton of time to be able to talk, because we as parents are the best resource for we as parents. But let me tell you why anxiety, depression, and worry is at an all-time high. I shared this with your Next Gen staff this afternoon. In 2007, if you were to have asked adults and teenagers and children, what's the one primary feeling you feel? The overwhelming feeling in 2007 was loneliness. Now watch this. 2007 is also when the iPhone came out. And as the iPhone is coming out, we're saying we're lonely. We think it's going to solve in some way, shape, or form. It will connect us all. And we all sit here this afternoon and we understand that even though it's an incredible resource, and you're not looking at a person who thinks that it is the ills of it's the end of our demise as we know it, but we can certainly say that it has created less connectivity than it's helped in some shape or form. But when you put that on top of, and again, not counting or not even considering the pandemic, here's what's going on with the next generation. They have incredibly busy schedules and academic pressure. And that starts, by the way, when they're children. One of the things you need to understand about your community is because you live so close to the research triangle, there is a ton of academic pressure in this town. And you're living, other than Boston, Massachusetts, the Research Triangle is considered the epicenter of academia in our country. Every school except UNC Chapel Hill is a good school. So, and if you're Tar Heel, I'm just joking, I promise. But let's consider how busy even elementary age kids are and the pressure they feel to excel. If you are parenting elementary age kids, one of the reasons why they feel that pressure is from a developmental standpoint. It's when they are elementary age that things go from drawing a cute little picture to being graded. And so academic pressure in our culture is incredibly high. Their schedules are crazier than our schedules. They have inadequate coping skills. Much of what's happening as a result, as it relates to inadequate coping skills, is because they do spend so much time interacting and connecting on smartphones. And so you generally see the top of their heads, and they haven't developed the capacity to look people in the eye and talk to them. By the way, we're gonna practice that tonight in your half circle. We're gonna look each other in the eye and talk, because they've got to learn, like we have to relearn, how to have coping skills, not only in how we interact with each other, but from the coping standpoint, when something crazy happens, how do I handle this? How do I handle this? Most of us in this room, this is a general statement, but most of us in this room, from a generational standpoint, were parented by helicopter parents, which means they hovered over us. There are two reactions to helicopter parents. One reaction is to become Carrie Underwood and just become a Jesus take the wheel parent. And the other reaction is to become a snowplow parent. And snowplow parents, instead of preparing the child for the path, You keep plowing the way and you prepare the path for the child. And consequently, when all hell breaks loose in their life or there's some sort of tension, they don't know how to handle that. And I just want to say this to you. My wife Kelly is here with me. We have 3 young adult children. We understand the tension of wanting to plow the way. But hear this from someone who works with teenagers every single day. It doesn't help your child. What happens is they have inadequate coping skills. Risky behavior has always been around. Some of you are here tonight because you believe you are raising problem child the 7th, okay? They were born from your womb, mom, and you don't know what you did wrong, okay? And you didn't do anything wrong. It's just a part of them growing up. For some of them, they're having difficulty navigating relationships. COVID and the pandemic has not helped that. That's part of the reason why I think so many of our school systems in our country want children to be together. As much as it is about education, it's also because relationships are formed there. But a lot of our children have a difficult time navigating relationships, and this is just true. If your child is already using social media at a young age, and for those of you that have high schoolers, if your children have Instagram, TikTok, or whatever, they are living in whether you like it or not, they are living in a constant state of anxiety and comparison because nobody posts the awful things in their life. It's always the highlight film. And our children compare themselves to that. That's part of the reason why we are where we are. If you don't believe that academic pressure is a real deal, students that attend high-achieving schools or who have parents who have unrealistic expectations are 3 to 7 times higher. They have a higher rate of clinical depression and anxiety symptoms than the national norms. So you got to consider, and we've got to consider as parents, how much pressure are we putting on our children academically? Here's another one for you. The price of a scholarship or college admission, can we agree with this, is not worth mental health. And for some of our children, they are literally suffering, worrying, and depressed and full of anxiety just because of where it is that they think we want them or demand that they go to school. So that's going on. Depression, anxiety is costing the global market about $1 trillion right now. If you want to know how it's impacting the greater whole of the world. And I'm going to say this unapologetically. I think for far too long in faith communities, we've talked about this like a sin issue instead of a mental health issue. And we're not going to talk about it as a sin issue because it's not a sin issue, it's a mental health issue. And everybody, look at me. Having a child that is struggling with mental health is not an awful bad thing. It's why we need each other. It's why we need to be able to put our arms around each other. And it's why we have to learn as parents to have better tools. If you want to know how extreme it's becoming, this is how extreme it's becoming. 1 in 5 teenagers today are self-harming. By self-harming, I mean cutting, trying to hurt themselves. It could be an eating disorder. And if you want to know how quickly that's changed, that number was 1 in 12 in 2011. So 10 years ago, it was 1 in 12. Today, it's 1 in 5. How serious is self-hurting or self-harming becoming? 1 in 6 teenagers today will consider suicide. And I need to say this unapologetically in front of all of you because some of us in this room, you may have a child who considers themselves a non-traditional sexual orientation. This statistic changes by 300% if it's an issue of sexual orientation. That is why, for those of us who are Jesus people, and the faith communities of our country, we have to make a decision, how much will we tell kids and mean it that you're safe here and you belong? Because they desperately need it. I would propose that food is our most abused anxiety drug. And some of you understand that because whether it's you or your child has turned to food as a way to kind of, numb themselves, and then exercise is our most underutilized antidepressant. And so most of us in this room understand that as adults because we know that as much as I would love to dive into Whataburger any chance I can, it's not good. And we also know that just sitting around isn't good for us as well. And this is also comes into play. Some of us have children that they're just naturally not active. But all the data and the medical community tells us that if we can help our children with their diet and with exercise, it begins to clear some things here as well. Here's what I think a very simple way of talking about anxiety is. Anxiety, and if there's a time we understand conspiracy theories, it's now. Anxiety is you creating conspiracy theories about yourself. That's what anxiety is. It's you convincing yourself that there is something conspiring against you. Now, here's what's interesting from a medical perspective, and I want to make sure you guys can see this. The way the brain is to operate from a healthy perspective, for those of you that don't know, you have a logical part of your brain and an emotional part of your brain. And the emotional part of your brain, when there is something that causes emotion in you, there's a process that happens where emotion happens, you hand it off to the process to the logical part of your brain. The logical part of your brain answers some things about what's going on, and it transfers it back to your emotion, and it's fluid. For example, if I were to drop, or we were to hear a giant boom and glass shattering, all of us in this room, the emotional side of us, your heart rate would jump, and you would begin to think, what is it? And then someone would run outside and say, somebody dropped something, and you logically go, I'm safe. That's the way the brain is intended, and it functions from a healthy perspective. Here's what happens with worry, stress, and anxiety. There becomes a barrier in between those two parts of the brain. If you're a wine connoisseur, you understand this, because if you've ever been to a winery, where's Mike Ashcraft? He knows about this. No, just picking. If you've ever been to, only when he's smoking. Anyway, if you've ever been to a winery, they talk about the wine that pairs the best with a different, food or cheese, okay? Well, here's what happens as it relates to despair. Think of it this way, that the brain, when it's unhealthy, is not pairing, the emotional side is not pairing with the logical side and vice versa, because there's a barrier that's been created. The stress hormone that gets released in the body begins to flood that part of the brain to the degree that usually the emotional side of the brain gets flooded. And so what happens is that the logical side of the brain becomes illogical. And the emotional side of the brain becomes numb. That's why if you sit here tonight and your child is struggling with depression, worry, anxiety, and you look at them, especially those of you who are parenting high schoolers, and there's this blank stare, it's because there's a barrier. And that barrier has been caused by the stress, anxiety, and worry. And you are adults. I don't feel the need to bore you with all the things. It's not boring, it's actually triggering. All the things that are going on in our culture that are causing the barrier. Everybody okay? Because we are living in a time where it is not normal. And all of us in this room could say that our children need to toughen up. And we're going to talk about that because grit is a part of the equation in helping them. But please hear me say this. You and I are not children. We're not toddlers. We're not middle schoolers and high schoolers in 2021. We get way down the road, and it is easy for us to look back and think, well, I wouldn't have been that way. You and I don't have the luxury of saying that. And you're right. I grew up in the home of a military veteran. There are parts of me that think my dad would not let me live that way. But it doesn't mean that I wouldn't have been unhealthy. And it doesn't mean your son or daughter isn't unhealthy either. But this is what's happening in the brain. This is what's happening. And here's the interesting part of us sitting in a church talking about this. If I were to summarize our 2 sessions tonight, I want to give you hope and handles, okay? Hope and handles. You read the book of Philippians, Paul writes a letter to this church that springs up in Philippi in the 1st century. And the first thing he says is, don't worry about anything. And I say to all of us tonight, Paul is incredibly tone deaf. Because it would be easy for me to go, hey, here's what's happening in the brain. This is what's happening in the world, but don't worry. It feels incredibly tone deaf until you understand what Paul is actually saying. First of all, understand that Paul is writing a letter to a church who so loved him. He's writing this from prison, and they are incredibly concerned about him. So when he says, don't worry about anything, he's literally saying, all is okay with where I am. You don't have to be concerned because they're not harming me. Yes, I'm in prison, but I'm okay. He's not saying don't worry about anything, blanket statement. Why are you worrying? You're in sin. The other thing you need to understand is that there are people coming along in the Philippian church trying to be unbiblical or extra biblical to those people to try to tell them, this is what you've got to do to be a Jesus follower. And Paul is saying to them, don't worry about that. That's silly. He also had to, this is interesting, he had to break up a dispute between two women who were being drama queens in the Philippian church. I know that never happens in your, neck of the woods, but it was happening there. And he's saying, don't worry about that. He says, though, don't worry about anything, but pray about everything. Before we get started, and we give handles, my question to all of us in this room is simply this. How much are you praying for your child? Are you saying more than you pray? Are you praying about everything? For you and your partner, for you and your spouse, for you and your significant other. Are you praying about this? Why is that such a big deal? I think it's a big deal because of what Paul continues to say. He says, tell God what you need. Tell God what you need and thank him for all that he's done. So in other words, take your needs to God, thank him for who he already is. And this is the part that got me. Paul seems to imply it borders on conditional. That when you and I take our needs before God, then you'll experience God's peace. In other words, if you are just griping about this, worrying about this, being, anxiety-ridden about the anxiety that's in your kids, guess what's going to happen? You're going to stay in that. But Paul seems to imply that when you and I give this to God, when we are thankful, when we take everything that is going on to him, then you'll experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. And I promise you this, as someone who, especially in 2020, our family experienced peace like we did not know existed. This is what he does. His peace will guard your hearts. His peace will guard your minds. You and I will start walking through a culture that seems like it is blowing up. And as broken as you are about it, as a parent, you can go, It doesn't mean you stop worrying about your child. But Paul's promise to us is that the peace of Christ will guard your heart and it'll guard your mind. And watch this. As good as you can get at this as a parent, we can help our children get good at this. Pray about everything. Pray about everything. Thank God. Remember who he is, but give him all that's going on and allow his peace to guard your heart and your mind. So I'm going to leave you with this, and then here's the good part. We're going to break up into our little half moons here, and there is a question guide on the seats, and you guys are going to get to interact with that. I think we probably have seat captains that are going to help you with that. But here's the last thing I want to say as we get ready to dive in and have some discussion, and we're just going to let you guys guide yourselves and lead yourselves in this discussion. But remember, you've got to be vulnerable. You've got to be open. You cannot be that person who decides, I'm just going to pretend to be okay. If you worry about things, mom and dad, that you cannot control, worry is controlling you. If you worry about things that you can't control, Worry is controlling you. So, y'all ready? We're gonna huddle up. Oh, you're gonna lead this, Erica, my fault. That's her cue of saying, Stuart, shut up. Okay, good.
Just real quick, like Stuart said, you have discussion questions to share. Please feel free to pull your chairs together, more of a circle if you feel comfortable. That might be easier to talk. It's up to your group. Definitely pick a leader to kind of facilitate through. And this is a great time to grab more water bottles in the back or snacks or even use the restroom. We have 20 minutes. I think we're going to put the timer up on the clock so you have an idea. But thank you so much, Stuart, for part one.
Go. All right, let's dive into handles, and I want to do this quickly because you guys are having such great discussion. But we do want to make sure we give you some practical tools. I do also want to say that this is such a complicated issue that there is no way to handle in an hour or an hour and a half this comprehensively. So we're going to do a Q&A time once we're done with our second discussion time, and then your staff and I will be more than happy to hang around and answer any questions, but I still cannot promise that we'll have all the answers, but that's why we're for each other. You may have met a Navy man who has this tattooed on him somewhere. The Navy has this adage, hold fast and stay true, and I love it. The whole fast part is really interesting and kind of funny to me because for those of you that don't know, especially on a day where a hurricane hit Louisiana, when ships like this back in the old days would go through a storm, what they would tell the sailors to do is to literally strap themselves with rope onto something that you would have to hold fast. I don't know if you can see these guys here. Here's a close-up of them. But they have literally tied themselves basically onto the ship so that they would not get blown off. And then whoever was steering the ship would literally tie their hands to the steering wheel and make sure that if there was a way for them to see the direction, that they would stay true. So that's where the idea of holding fast and staying true comes from, and it's a great illustration for who we have to be as moms and dads. That we are in a time where the wind is blowing and you're gonna have to strap yourself in, and somebody or both of you are going to have to stay true to the course, not only in following Jesus, but being the mom and dad that you want to be for your child. Anxiety to me is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but you don't go anywhere. And I wanted this visual for you for the rest of your life. Every time you pass Cracker Barrel, I want you to think about anxiety and stress because it gives you something to do, but you just don't move. You don't go anywhere. And a lot of us, our children, are experiencing some sort of depression. They're worried. They're experiencing anxiety. And you see them literally just stay in that pattern. And we even had this question today during our next Gen time. Some of us have children who have learned that anxiety is the buzzword that it is. And you are wondering, are you really full of anxiousness or are you just using that? And that's a legit concern for some of us in the room because it is such a buzzword. But what we don't want to do is neglect or negate the fact that a lot of our children are feeling incredibly anxious. So here's what I want to do. I want to make 4 statements and give you 4 handles for you to help your children. And here's the first statement. Mom and dad, crisis is not new and it is always a necessary part of growing up. Crisis is not new, and it's always necessary for our children growing up. What is new is the amount of crisis that is happening at this time. But crisis is necessary for our kids to experience adversity, understand what's really important to them, be able to chew up the meat and spit out the bones. All of those things are important. So crisis is important. But the issue at play for us today in 2021 is the amount of crisis that's happening at the same time. Here's number 2. Crisis, in my opinion, creates a platform to discover who we are. You can see all of the things that are happening with your son or daughter as something that will destroy them, or we can use it as a tool. And I would propose that all of us in this room, especially if mom and dad collectively, if you guys are on the same page, you can use whatever crisis is going on in your son and daughter's life to help them to begin to get a real deep peek at who they are as a person. It is a revealer of us. What it does is it shows some things inside that may be missing. It also, and hear me, parents, Kelly and I will be the first to stand up, and it will show you your weaknesses as a parent. It'll show you and I where we're insecure. It'll show you places in our belief system and our frame of reference that maybe we've overdone it a little bit. Maybe we need to reel it in a little bit. Perhaps it shows, are you ready for this, our own hypocrisy. So you have to be careful when you try to use crisis for what it can be used usefully for, because we always have to start with us. But it certainly can be a platform for our children to discover who they are. Thirdly, relationships create a safe place to resolve who we are. Your children, I know it doesn't feel like this sometimes, but your children desperately need a relationship with someone who has been to the future. And that's who adults are. We have been to the future. And they need that relationship because it's within the context of relationships that we are able to help them to begin to figure out a safe place for them to resolve who they are. It's why I showed that clip at the beginning of our time together, because I think you and I, being loving, caring adults who take them seriously, it gives them a safe place. Some of you have experienced that. You've decided, I am going to be unconditional in my acceptance and my belonging, regardless of what's going down in your life. And you find yourself 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years down the road, and your relationship with your child is completely different in a great way. Even though the issue may still be there, what you've become is safe to them. So let's make sure that we can understand that conflict is going to happen, crisis is going to happen, but our relationships with our children become the safe place for them to resolve whatever's happening. And I love this principle, and it is true. The buffer in every crisis is love. The buffer in every crisis is love. We need not look any further to our antidote than the person of Jesus. If you're wondering what God has to say about all of anxiousness, worry, and depression, everybody ready? Jesus is what God has to say. Jesus is what God has to say. And Jesus' main primary thing that he wants us to be to our children is love. And it's the one thing, this is beautiful, it's the one thing that you can do even though you're not in control. You can love. You can offer unconditional belonging. You and I have the capacity to do that as parents. Now, let's get really, really practical, okay? Here's what I want to encourage you to think about, and Sass and I are going to talk about a book that we're going to make available for you after we're done. But some associates of ours at Orange have written a book called Seen, and I love the team that wrote it. In fact, one of the persons who wrote it, Dr. Shinwei Williams, is actually my therapist, and we'll talk about therapy in just a second. But I just want you to know that I go to therapy. Why? Because I is jacked up. That's just... And if you can giggle all you want, but you put your arm around somebody earlier, that's jacked up too. All right, so, but the thing that I love about this book is they give us unbelievably, incredibly practical handles. And here's a couple of things that you and I can do for our children when they start exhibiting signs of worry, anxiety, depression. First of all, we can show up. We can show up. The last thing you and I want to do as moms and dads is ignore and act like they are not acting like themselves. So we can show up. What showing up makes a child feel is loved. When you try to ignore it, when you try to dismiss it, that's not showing up. But when you and I show up and say and act as if I can tell something is going on and I just want you to know I see you, they feel loved. Seeing them is important. Seeing them is important. One of the things that's happened in our culture at the rapid speed that culture is working, and so many of you in this room are incredibly successful and you have your own place of work or business or whatever, we can get so caught up in our lives, moms and dads, that our children are crying out in some way, shape, or form, and they don't feel seen. Seeing them says to them, you seeing your child, here's what I mean by that, you noticing that there's a difference in their countenance, you noticing that they've gotten quiet, you noticing that their attitude has tended to change, you noticing that when a certain someone's, their name comes up in conversation, it goes from to something changes. Seeing them makes them feel understood. Now, watch this. You'll also notice that we're trying to connect to that emotional part of them as well, because these are all feelings to kind of break that barrier between the logic and the emotion. Listening to them, this will be the hardest thing for you as a parent, especially if you are a man. Dad, sometimes our children don't need you to fix anything. They just want you to listen. By the way, that's good marriage advice too, but let's keep going. They just want you to listen. Learn this phrase, tell me more. Tell me more. Resist the urge to say, well, let me tell you how we can correct that. Tell me more. Why do you feel that way? Where did that start? What happened? Watch. When you ask questions and you just listen, your children, our children, feel safe. When I start trying to correct, they feel like this is not a safe place for me to be honest. They feel judged. Many times our kids who are kind of bogged down in worry and depression, they know they're bogged down and they feel like they're a disappointment to us as parents. So listening makes them feel safe. Speak life to them. Speak life to them. There are ample time. First of all, having raised 3 young adult children, I can tell you this. Very seldom do you have to tell your children where they're wrong. They already know. And some of us, this is going to sting a little bit, but you're really, really good at being critical of your kids, but you're not very good at speaking life into them. Let me tell you what happens to children who have parents who are always overly critical. Children who have parents who are overly critical do not stop loving you as parents. They stop loving themselves. There are times when we need to coach our kids up, but if all you are is critical, that's not tough love. That's being a jerk. Everybody okay? And I say that in love, all right? Learn how to speak life into your kids, because speaking life into your children, especially when they're bogged down in worry and they're doing this, it makes them feel worthy. It makes them feel worthy. They already feel like they're disappointing you. And isn't this interesting? How crazy is it for us as moms and dads that moms, you got the lion's share of this sense, but we all get this innate capacity to tell when there's something going wrong or something going on. And if you and I don't learn how to speak life, our children just walk around during their elementary age, middle school, and high school, and they just feel like I am worthless. But watch this. All of us have been through this too. In some way, shape, or form, to some degree, we have been through these things. And what do you wish your mom or dad would have done? What I wish my mom and dad would have known how to do, my mom did a decent job of basically counteracting all the critical of my dad. But I just wish my dad could have spoken life into me. And then lastly, and this is important, my father passed away last January. Before I got sick in March of 2020, my dad died in January. And he loved to say about this generation of children that they have a whole lot of quit in them, boy. We have to build grit into them. Grit, by grit, I mean this resilience to bounce back when something goes wrong. It is a difficult thing for this generation. Some of it is because we have tried to prepare the path and not the child, but we have to build resiliency in our children. When we build the capacity for our kids to come back, they feel empowered. We watch that play out with our teenage daughter, and I've probably have shared this story before, and if I have, I'm sorry, but our oldest daughter, our middle child, tore her ACL 6 games into her senior year in high school. And watching her bounce back from that was one of the most painful things we watched because we didn't realize how much of it was here. But watching her come back and feel empowered was unbelievable, to watch her confidence change because she came back from something that is hard. You and I have that capacity to build grit in our children. So we have to help them with that. Here's what starts happening though in the mind and the heart of a kid. The person you and I listen to the most in our life is ourselves. We listen to ourselves more than anybody else. And your children are listening to themselves. So one of the things that I think is important for us to do is to teach them how to speak to themselves. And for our kids who are having a hard time telling themselves or speaking to themselves the right way, I want you to think about think. Here's the acronym, and I hate using acronyms, but this one is good. Is this thought, first of all, true? Is this thought true? There is so much room for the next generation to have stinking thinking today. And they think things about themselves that are not true. If you are parenting a young lady, a female in our culture, and it starts when they're in elementary age, and it gets even worse when they're in high school and middle school, let's just be honest, none of us would go back and be a middle schooler ever. But the thing that young ladies in our culture do more than anything else is they lie to themselves when they look in the mirror. They don't think true thoughts about themselves. They are constantly comparing themselves. So is this thought true? It is a good thing to help ask our children this question, that thought that you're thinking, is it true? Now watch this, mom and dad. You and I have to have the ability to be able to say, well, this is what you're saying is reality, but this is what God says about you. If you want to know why it's important for you and I to have our hearts and our minds, just enamored with what it is that God's word says about our kids, it's that reason alone. What is it that God says about you, your creator? This is what's true. Is this true? Number 2, is this the H? Is it helpful? Is what you're thinking actually helping you or is it hurting you? Now, why get our children to ask themselves these kind of questions? Well, here's the reason why. What you're not trying to do is think for them. You want them to learn to do this themselves. Is this true? Is this helpful? Is it harming you? Is it hurting you? Is it hurting the way you see yourself? Or is it helping you? Is it inspiring? Sometimes we have to inspire ourselves. And telling some watered down, irrational, dramatic or less than inspiring story about ourselves isn't helping things. So are you inspiring yourself? Is this necessary? Is this necessary? Let's think about the number of thoughts that our kids have that are just not necessary. It's not necessary not only for you to think about that, but it's not necessary for you to even remotely think that you should engage that thought. It's just an unnecessary thing. And lastly, is it kind? The people that our children are the least kind to are themselves. They are the hardest on themselves. Now watch. Here's the reason why I wanted you to have this tool. Because you and I have got to do it with ourselves too. The reason why our children learn to be so irrational, tell themselves untruths, things that aren't helpful, things that aren't kind, things that are unnecessary, things that don't inspire them, is because they listen to us speak. So before you try to help your kids with this, how well are you doing this yourself? That's a tough test for all of us in the room. All right, here's the last four, and then we're going to get into circles and talk about this. Parents, let's help our children, first of all, get control over things that they can't control. Get control over the things, get control of the things that you can control. There are some things that our children that can control. They can control their attitude. They can control their integrity. They can control how they think. They can control, is this true? I mean, is this helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? There are things that they can control. There are some things that they cannot control. They can't control the fact that there's a pandemic going on, but they can control how they react in it. So helping our kids understand these are some things that you can control. Control the controllables and let the things that you can't control, we'll deal with those some other way. It's a basic premise, by the way, of athletics. Control the controllables, and all the other stuff, we'll just figure out how to deal with that. So help your children. How do we help our kids get control of the things that they can control? How do we help them get clear on whose opinion of you matters? I brought a sticky note on purpose, and I borrowed this from Dr. Brene Brown, who I love dearly, and I've never met her. Dr. Brene Brown has this thing that she calls get clear on your square squad. And here's what she implies, and I really want to encourage everybody in the room to do this as well. She says, take a sticky note and write down the names of the people in your life whose opinion of you matters. Now, here's why that's tough for some of us as children, for some of us as parents. Your children think that all 3,000 followers that they have on Twitter and TikTok's opinion of them matters. Some of us as adults go, I can't break down whose opinion of me matters on a sticky note. It's the reason why you need to use a sticky note. Because here's the truth about our children. Everybody, they have way too many people whose opinion of them matters. And they need to figure out, you know what? I love you, I care about you, but your opinion of me isn't that big of a deal to me. Whose opinion of you matters? I have a square squad, and I would take Calvinism to a whole nother level because there's only a few people that I have chosen that are on, their opinion of me really, really matters. How do you help your children get clear on who those people are? Once they get clear on who those people are, have them do this. Either text them, call them, or write them. I don't know if y'all know this, but you can write on a piece of paper and put it in this envelope and put a sticky thing on it, and you can put that box at the end of anyway. Here's what you want to say to those people. I'm trying to get clear on whose opinion of me matters, and your opinion of me matters, and I want to thank you. What this does is it says to them, I want you speaking into my life. Now, if you want to know how important Port City is or should be to you as a parent, a kid's small group leader should be one of those names on their square squad. Because you and I as parents need another caring adult echoing and reinforcing what it is that we're trying to help our children with. And if you don't, all the more reason why this faith community is so incredibly important. And they're not paying me to say that. I am saying that from personal experience. That our children desperately need adults other than us speaking into their life, and that name should be on their square squad. There are some friends who your children have whose opinion matters too much. And you're gonna have to walk your children through pumping the brakes and backing out of not necessarily the relationship, but the opinion mattering so much. So help them get clear on whose opinion of them matters. Here's the third one. Get honest about the things that really matter. This one is probably the most difficult. And let me illustrate it this way. We have to help our kids understand, did you have a bad 30 seconds or do you have an awful life? Everybody okay? Did you just get in trouble today or is your whole life going to hell in a handbasket? Did you have a bad game or are you the worst human being that's ever tried to play a sport in the history of sports? And isn't it amazing how they take one thing and they make it bigger than it really is? We have to help them start figuring out and get honest about what really matters. That goes with relationships with significant others. For those of you that are in the dating scene now, we're gonna have to help them with that. It goes with friendships because the older that you get, parents of younger kids, the older that they get, those relationships change. Think about how many of us in this room can't even remember and haven't seen the people we were the closest to in high school. What really matters? And help them get honest about it. Do people matter? Yes. Do people matter? Yes. Do situations and events matter? Yes. But they're not all that matters and they're not the most important thing. Helping our children understand that you are going to, are you ready? Fail. Failure, moms and dads, is an event. It's not your kid. Everybody okay? Your children are not failures. Will they fail? Have they failed? Will they fail again? Yes. And if they haven't, they're not living and they're not trying. They're going to fail, but they're not failures. Failure is an event, it's not a person. Help them get clear on what and who really matters. And then this is the last one, and I'll stop here so we can talk. Get help for the things that you cannot control. There are some of us in this room, you have a son or a daughter that has some sort of addiction. There are those of us in this room, you have a son or a daughter, they are hurting themselves, cutting themselves. Some of us in this room, we have children that are having suicidal thoughts or maybe even have had a suicidal attempt. And there are things, mom and dad, that are way above your pay grade. And that's okay, because we weren't born parents and we don't know what we're doing. And that's why, in my opinion, all of us in this room need to be okay. Do we need to take everything we can to the hands of Jesus and let him take and guard our hearts and minds? Absolutely. But there are some things where people who know more and are more educated and trained need to step in. And you as a mom and you as a dad have to lay aside your pride and be okay with counseling. It's not a cuss word. It's not a bad thing. You are looking at a dude who's been to therapy. After what we went through with my illness, all of our family, my wife and our 3 children, went to counseling and still are. Not only did they go to counseling, but every single one of our children got a therapy pet. We bought a zoo. We became the proud grandparents of cats, and I would have never thought I would say that. But we now have 3 grand kittens and a grandpuppy in our house. Or not in our house. They live in their own place. But here's the reason why. If it helps, it's not a sign of weakness. It's them going, I want to be better. It's them going, I don't want to walk around in the world with my heart on edge, so angry. Or, then become numb. None of us want that. So you've got to be okay, not being okay. You've got to be okay going, you know what? This is a place where I can't control it. It's bigger than I am, and I need help. And here's how you know this place cares, because they've given me full permission and begged me to say this. Because if you need help, this place wants to help you. So much so, and you can ask your Gen Z staff this, that today when I met with them, I proposed that one of the things that we have to do in every church event that we do from now on with adolescents is we need to have a trained professional counselor on hand, because the issues are that serious. They are far beyond your small group leader and even your paid staff's pay grade. And we should have mandatory nap time, but that was just free. And guess who would cheer about that the most? The high schoolers. Because they are absolutely exhausted. Get control over what you can control. Get clear on what really matters, or who really matters. Get honest about the things that really matter, and get help for the things that you can't control. Now, we're going to circle up. We got more to talk about. Erica, do you need to say anything? We're going rock and roll, right, diving in. Erica has given me the thumbs up, so get in your circles and let's talk about it.
So we're going to finish up for a few minutes with a little bit of Q&A. If I don't know you, my name's Chris Sasser. I am the pastor of Family Ministries. Most people call me Sass, and we are so thankful that you would kind of be here tonight, and so thankful for Stuart being here. So we're going to take just a few minutes to, if anybody in the room has a question that you want to ask Stuart about anything that you've heard, or any kind of clarification that you need, just a little bit of Q&A. Erica, you still got your microphone, so I'm going to ask you to maybe, if anybody raises their hand, to just walk over to them. If nobody has any questions they want to ask Stuart, that's fine. We'll move on to. But anybody have anything they want to ask Stuart before we close up tonight? Oh, Erica, so easy for you right there. So, oh yeah. Well, yeah, use the mic if you don't mind.
Could you talk about...
Can we turn the mic on?
suggestions for cell phone and social media boundaries
Oh,
for high school?
Burn it.
burn it. Did you say burn it?
Just throw it in the fire.
You're a great parent. If you are the parent of a middle schooler or elementary age, hear me. I need to get to them. From a developmental standpoint, your children do not have the capacity to logically reason with what social media and a smartphone offers. So I don't think it's a wise idea. I would never tell anybody what to do. I will make some suggestions. I do not think it's wise for a high schooler to have their phone in their room by themselves after a certain hour. I do think that once they reach a certain age, you need to begin, like, responsibility breeds freedom, because they are going to go away to school and have to be able to deal with that, but responsibility breeds freedom. I also think it's important for you to start helping them understand how encapsulating the whole thing becomes. Like, when you start seeing signs like they're wanting, like, I don't think it's a good idea for them to have them at dinner, at the table. I think, a fun thing to do is put it in the middle, and if you look at it, then somehow you're going to pay for the meal, or you're going to do the dishes. And then if you have a child who always wants to do the dishes, you have a problem. But it's, what we can't do is just say absolutely not, and we don't teach them responsibility. What we also can't do is go throw our hands up and go, it's impossible. So I think it's letting their responsibility breed freedom. And then the other thing too, and this is the biggest thing we deal with in my line of work, most parents have no clue what apps their kids are on. And there's some things that are relatively dangerous and not healthy that our children either see or are constantly visiting. So my suggestion to you as a parent is to stick your nose in their business, especially, and this is going to sound harsh, but it's just true. If you're paying the cell phone bill, it's your phone. It's not their phone. So you have a right to see it. And if they don't want you to see it, here's your sign.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helped, but, or you could do what Sass says and burn it.
Okay. Anybody else?
That's a great question.
For Stuart. Dudley, come on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Did everybody hear that? Okay.
I think that's a tricky thing in our culture because you guys value modesty. I think it's important, but our culture doesn't. And unfortunately, they're surrounded by people who don't think that same way. I think the most important thing we can do as parents is to help them love themselves. It's also important, and can I go there?
Sure.
It's also important for young ladies to be as proud and confident in who they are as young men who walk around with their shirts off at the beach. I think that's just as important, but doing it in a way that is not like flaunting everything. Because what we wanted to make sure we did was launch our girls into culture where they were confident in themselves, so much so that they didn't feel like they needed to show everything that they had. To be very candid with you, we've had that mixed up quite a bit in faith communities for a number of years, where, you know, it's a guy's responsibility to stay pure, and they put all the pressure on girls to keep them pure, and it's not a young lady's responsibility to keep a young man pure. It's his. So consequently, we want our daughters to be confident in who they are, to be proud of who they are physically, but also don't feel like I have to flaunt it to get attention. But it is a delicate dance, especially, Dudley, and we can talk about this offline, as a father, because our daughters' dads hang on every word that we say. And their body image many times comes about by the words that we either say or don't say to them. So,
Have we ever told you no, you can't go there in an answer like that? Anyway.
well, at least I asked permission.
Yes, I understand. Anybody else? One more maybe question for Stuart? Anybody? Right back there. Let's do, well, you can say it loudly.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Yeah, let's use the mic for.
Erica's watched too much Donahue.
So when you're having that discussion about remaining pure, whether male or female, and they turn to you, the parent, and say, well, you know, Dad or Mom, what did you do, or how did it work for you? And maybe your answer's not exactly spot on, how to handle that and be honest and navigate.
Yeah, that's
Thanks
when
for coming,
say,
everybody. It's been a good night. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah. That's when I say, you need to talk to your small group leader. Kelly and I, it's kind of like your cell phone. There's an age where we feel like they can be responsible with that information. I don't think it does us well at all for them to find out without intention about our past. The other thing too is I don't want to promote and highlight how jacked up I was in high school. I don't think that does them any good at all. So we made a decision to be really, really honest with them when we felt like it was appropriate, and to be honest with them in an appropriate way, but also to share with them how our inability to be who we want them to be has actually affected our marriage. Because the issue in that specific issue is intimacy. It's to know someone and be fully known without any fear of rejection. And I think it's the reason why Paul says it's the one thing that we do where it's you actually destroying yourself, because you're destroying your capacity to have intimacy with your future spouse. So I don't think it's a bad thing for you to be honest, but they also don't need to know everything, because that's like drinking from a fire hydrant. And the other thing too, I remember I didn't know this question will mess me up. I can remember the day when my son realized I wasn't Superman. And you just need to be ready that it will change how your children see you, but it could change in a great way too, because it helps them go, oh, my dad wasn't perfect. My mom wasn't perfect, but yet they still love me. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so talk really quickly. Stuart referenced, I think you just referenced one of the two books,
Yep.
but we have two books that are for sale back there in the Connect Center that you could get one tonight, and they'll be here at church for the next several weeks, kind of over in our bookstore. But talk real quickly about both of these so folks can know what it is they
This
might
is
want to
by
grab.
Will Hutcherson and our counselor, Shinwei Williams. Both of them work with us directly at Orange. It's a book called Seeing, Healing, Despair, and Anxiety in Kids and Teens Through the Power of Connection. This is a very, very practical book. Some of the brain stuff that I talked about, the think thing comes out of this book, so this is really, really good. And then these are our friends at the Fuller Youth Institute.
Yep.
Your staff here does a ton of stuff with them, Kara Powell and Brad Griffin. These are the three big questions that teenagers are asking. We actually at Orange are doing a ton of research as it relates to mattering. That is kind of spoken about in this book, because one of the very intriguing things that's coming out of all of this research, the three big questions are basically, am I significant? Is somebody aware of me? And then do I matter?
Yeah.
And the mattering thing is, who is it that's depending on you? If you want to know why your children are much more apt to want to miss church than they do a play, a recital, or their athletic competition, it's because they're needed there. They are relied on there. They matter there. And this is no knock on the church,
we talk
but
about
they
it all
can
the time
miss
around
here and everybody's still going to love them. But when they miss there, they're relied on. So how do we as parents begin to transfer that from a faith perspective to help? Who is it that's relying on your kids? All the data is screaming at us that that's an important part, and they're asking that question.
Yeah, and part of what we ask here is how can we as the church help them feel that responsibility so that they know that they are relied on here. It's why we encourage so many kids to serve. If you have a teenager, serve in Grow Zone or Treasure Island, because now they matter to someone else, and it is so it's a game changer for their faith.
Yeah, and their absence is noticed when they're not there. Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah. So, hey, a couple things real quick before we leave. Thank you to Stuart, really quick. Let's say thanks to him. Man, Stuart, you know how much we love you and how much we appreciate the way you speak life into us. And so what we'll be doing over the next couple of weeks is kind of taking different chunks of what he said and kind of, putting it on social media, and like his whole keynote presentation. I'll make sure that if you want it, it's available. If you want anything, you can just email us at parents@portcitychurch.org. I think that's on your little note sheet on the back, an email address. I would love feedback. We would love to hear feedback about events like these. Or are there other things that you think as a church we ought to be kind of talking about and dealing with? So please, instead of filling out something here tonight, which we've done in the past, we're just saying, please just send us an email at parents@portcitychurch.org to both tell us about tonight, and even if it's, a couple sentences, we just like to know, are we hitting the mark? Is there something else that we could be doing, even in the format of it? Just shoot us an email, let us know kind of how tonight went for you, or if there are other things that it would be helpful for us to be kind of covering. Obviously, as we're continuing to be in the pandemic, we're trying to figure out how to best do events like this and events that we've done in the past that are parent-kid events, daddy-daughter dance, all those kind of things. We're just sort of still kind of sorting out how we can do all that. But we want feedback from you guys. And I also want to say, please take advantage of Shelly and Erica, because, again, our church so believes in having what I call a whole family ministry. I think a lot of churches have a family ministry where we're going to do some good stuff for the kids and we're going to do stuff for the teenagers and then we're done. We believe that, no, you have to have kind of this formational ministry for children where they understand kind of the basics of faith and they understand who God is and who Jesus is. We believe you got to have a kind of transformational, engaging ministry for students to where they're kind of learning how to own their faith. And then it's on our heart that we got to have a practical and helpful ministry to parents. That's a whole family ministry, because if we're only doing the first two, we're not really kind of helping the family. So that's why we're doing events like this. So please keep kind of interacting with us, helping us kind of know how we can keep doing that better, and give us feedback at parents@portcitychurch.org. Last thing before we go is, like I said, you can get one of these books out there. If you don't have to go get your kids and you can take 10 minutes to help us set this room back up, we would appreciate that, because Overflow comes in here tomorrow night with 500 college students, and so it'll go really, really fast, and I can kind of direct us and tell us kind of where to go from there. So, Stuart, I was going to have you pray for us, but you left me. That's okay. I will tell you, right after this, we are headed in to record. We have a Parent Network podcast. If you are a podcast listener, please jump on that. We have interviews with people like Stuart when they come in. So he and I are going to go in right now and record kind of a little bit more about this particular topic, where it'll be a little bit of a recap for people who weren't here, but some more questions that I'm going to ask him. And we'll post that on Wednesday. And so you'll be able to kind of listen to that and share that with friends. That podcast is great because we not only interview people like Stuart, but we've got just people in the room who are parents who we interview, because we just want to be talking to each other. And so I know a bunch of folks in the room have been on the podcast as parents. If you ever want to do that, just let me know. We'd love to just sort of talk to you about kind of the way that you're growing in your faith and with your family. So go subscribe and listen to the Parent Network podcast, because hopefully that's another resource where we can help you. I'll pray for us. We'll be out of here. Jesus, thank you for Stuart and for Kelly and for just getting them here and for the wisdom that he brings. Lord, I just pray for all of us that we can continue to just step into what it means to help lead our kids through the anxiety and the stress that is so prevalent in them. God, just help us to take the things that were kind of shared with us tonight and to be able to put them in practice in our homes. Help us to encourage one another, our spouses, our friends, other people in our church. Just help us encourage one another as parents to take seriously what's going on with our kids and to do something about it. Not just be anxious about it ourselves, Lord, but to give it to you and to ask you to lead and guide us. So thank you for the way that you continue to teach us, and I thank you for my friends who joined us tonight. We love you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.